Welcome everybody to the online event on questions and answers for better cooperation and governance, Interreg Specific Objective. We could see there had been a great success because there's more than 170 registered right now. They are joining 123. I would like, well, most of you know me. My name is Mercedes Acitores, but I would like to introduce also my colleagues that they are able, well, thanks of them, we're able to run this event. Bernard, who will lead the part of the debate with the Commission. And then we will have Robert and Philip, who will take the part in Slido and making it more interactive with you. So, well, we hope that you have watched the videos taped, recorded by the Commission, and also those that may be reflections from the programs, how they are thinking to deal with a specific objective one. And they give us some ideas. So how are we going to proceed? There will be two parts. The first part will, Nathalie Berskelde, she will give some introductory remarks. And then Bernard will start moderating the debate with the Commission. And after second part, that will be the interactive part. And we hope you will be very active in asking questions in Slido. So after this introduction, please, Nathalie, now the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mercedes. And well, hello everyone, and very, very, very happy that you managed to get a new license for Zoom so that we can be a bit more, well, have less frustrations, and that everybody who wanted to join could actually join. That's very, very good news, and thank you, Interact, for reacting on that. So welcome everyone again to the ISO 1 discussion. I would like to open by saying that we have been asked to clarify the name of this Interreg Specific Objective, and I think we should all agree that we call it what it is, Interreg Specific Objective 1, which we simplify by mentioning ISO. I'm a little bit, I have to apologize for the confusion that the name is creating. When the regulation was drafted, we wrote Interreg -specific objective. The hyphen is very important because it actually signifies that this objective is specifically for Interreg programs. And I know there is confusion with the terminology under ERDF. But anyway, let's call it ISO 1. We think in units D1 and D2 that this objective is actually really, really important for the future of our programs, all our programs. We've been asked again and again whether this objective is obligatory, whether every single Interreg program has to choose ISO 1. Well, you know very well, nothing has changed since we made the presentation a while back, that for now this question is not yet clear. It's not been decided in the trilogues, so there are still different views around the table, and we cannot tell you yes, it's obligatory, or no, it's not. This is still an open question. However, whatever happens to this question, in DG Regio, we are convinced that this objective is highly, highly, highly recommended because it really reflects the specific nature of our programs and what differentiates our programs under Interreg from regional or national programs. We're also very convinced that it should lead to some structural changes in the way in which we approach and we manage the Interreg territories, whether they are cross-border or transnational, whether they are internal or external, or further away in the case of the outermost region. So we are very convinced of that. We also know that, as with anything new, of course, questions are raised. There is uncertainty on how to do this. It can be a bit destabilizing. We understand that fully. But we also think that if you give careful consideration to what the objectives are here, we are very confident you can come up with some substance that can be find its way into your programs, and that you will identify some fundamental activities that need to be addressed by Interreg, if only in the field of trust building, capacity building, and as I said, the institutional dimension of managing outreach. For me, that was really the opening remarks I wanted to make. I don't want to take too much time because there are so many questions that I think we should go directly to these questions and try to provide as many answers as we can today. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. Just a brief technical remark. I think you're looking into the wrong camera.
I am. I have a camera there, a screen there, but you are more beautiful on the big screen, Bernard. So I will try to look at the other machine then. Okay.
Sorry for that. So just to briefly introduce, today we have here from Unit D1, Simona and Pierre-Emmanuel, and from Unit D2, Natalie, Ricardo, and Olivier. And first of all, thanks for joining. I was inclined to say thanks for coming, but it's obvious, just joining the meeting. And of course, we have prepared a couple of opening questions to you where we had a feeling that it's something which is of interest to everyone. And I would now kindly ask Philip, maybe if you could share the screen, which is now, and I think a couple of questions went around. So what's the specific point about better cooperation governance when you compare it to using other policy objectives? Because in principle you could work on governance issues in every of these of the policy objectives, meaning policy objectives 1 to 5. So what do you see as the very specific point about better cooperation governance? And to look at it from a more technical perspective, is it, when it comes to programming, is it at the same ranks as any other policy objective? That would be our first introductory question. So, who would like to answer?
Hello, Bernhard.
Hi.
Good afternoon to everybody. I can take the first questions. The first question we agreed with Natalie that I would take the first one and she would take the two following ones. So yeah, so I'm also very happy to see such a big number of programs participating in the event. I've also see the future Interreg Next programs, some participation, so I'm very grateful for that. For those ones who do not know me, I work in D1 as a team leader for the 15 ENI cross-border cooperation programs on EU external borders with the neighborhood countries and Russia. So those programs joined DG Regio as of January this year. So on the questions that are on the table, well, I would like to point out that indeed each policy objective, as it has been presented, has its own aims and purpose and objectives. And this is the same case for the ISO 1. So this should always bear this in mind, that the main dividing line is really what is the objective of one PO, policy objective, and what is the objective. So the policy objectives 1 to 4 are sectoral ones, and they should improve the sectors which they mentioned: greener, smarter, better connected. And whereas in ISO 1, we speak about governance. So really, this should be the main point of division between ISO 1 and all the other ISOs. Just a quick reminder of what is it that we are supposed to do in ISO 1. We have said it in our presentation, but maybe a quick reminder. So what we want to do is to promote cooperation between institutions and citizens with a view to resolve legal and administrative obstacles in border regions. We want to enhance the capacity of authorities and stakeholders. We want to build trust and encourage people-to-people cooperation. For the transnational programs, there is a specific objective, and this is to enhance the institutional capacity of, namely, key implementers, to implement macro-regional strategies, sea basin strategies, and specific for EU external borders, we have the objective of enhancing sustainable democracy and supporting civil society actors. This, I think, should always be bear in mind if we want, and we are strongly encouraging every program to do that, that those are the specific action, basically mainly be addressed by this specific objective. Then how it works in the program architecture, the programming. Indeed, said we consider it on the same equal level as a policy objective. So it should be programmed that way. A policy objective, as it is now under the current legal framework, can be translated into several priority axes. But each priority axis called one policy objective. So the same applies for the ISO 1. We think that the simplest is that ISO 1 actually is a separate priority axis, which can then be monitored, to which we can we attach the other specific objectives. And this is, I understand, also the question which will Natalie address as under the point 2. There was also a question about the whether it can be implemented via small projects fund. Yes, indeed, but small projects fund is a tool which can be used for any policy objective, including for the Interreg specific, I mean, better cooperation governance specific objective, ISO 1. So there is no limitation in the use of the small projects fund. There were many questions indeed on the distinguishing between ISO 1 and PO5. So Europe closer to citizens, or Europe and its neighborhood closer to citizens for Interreg Next programs. Well, here again, the main dividing line is really in the purpose. Just to remind that policy objective 5 is a territorial policy objective. It's a horizontal approach. It's a policy objective which has as its ultimate aim to implement local and regional territorial strategies. So, and the main feature of this, of PO5, is a participatory multi-level governance approach. This is essential. Whereas for ISO 1, there is no such obligation to be part. It can be standalone actions. At the same time, there is a difference about the sectors which should be tackled. For the PO5, there should be a multi-sectoral approach, territorial approach. It is about implementing territorial strategies which tackle several sectors. Among them can be tourism, can be let's say culture, but there can be all the other sectors which are normally supported under the different policy objectives. So this is the main feature of the PO5. Whereas For ISO 1, the main feature is again the governance. So if we consider governance as a sector, then we should promote governance things. Again, on the approach, bottom-up versus top-down. For PO5, the bottom-up approach is the obligatory one. So it has to be implemented again through local and regional territorial strategies. For ISO 1, there is no such obligation. We can have a top-down strategic actions supported under ISO 1. As for the types of actions, that is again different, because, for example, when we speak about infrastructure, under ISO 1, we do not really recommend to finance infrastructure. It's not meant for that. It's meant for improving governance. Whereas in PO5, of course, infrastructure is part, should be or can be naturally part of actions implemented under the territorial strategy. Overall, and also the results which are expected to come out from PO5 and ISO 1 are very different. What we expect as a result under PO5 is a change in the territory which is covered by the territorial strategy that the PO5 supports. Whether what we expect as results under ISO 1, it's actions which are linked to better governance. So some solutions found on the border obstacles, let's say better trust in the border area, better cooperation between different, maybe between actors in different sectors. But the results are in this respect very different. And last but not least, can we combine PO5 and ISO 1? Yes, we can. For example, under PO5, as we said, the basis is the territorial strategy. But this territorial strategy can indeed, development of such a strategy can indeed be supported under ISO 1. This is possible. But again, all the actions which are to be supported under the PO5 and ISO 1 then are different. So under ISO 1 you can support development of a territorial strategy, but the strategy should be then implemented under PO5. I think that I will leave it at that, and hopefully it was clear enough to cover the aspects.
Thanks a lot, Simona. And I understood that the next question, a very technical one, is then for Natalie. It's now really, we understood Interreg Specific Objective, better cooperation governance is one priority axis, same as any other policy objective. And now comes the question, does it have any specific objectives? Because in the slide presentation, there's a slide including specific objectives, and we've received a lot of questions related to that. Does it mean that you implicitly take all of them, or is it an invitation to pick out few of them and the option to have other actions? Does it mean that programs should find their tailor-made specific objectives, which is not the case in any other policy objective? So it's really from the very technical approach to programming that we're asking that question.
Okay, thank you for that question. Indeed, and this is an area where I can, of course, share with you that there isn't full clarity also in the vocabulary. In the slides that you have so helpfully included in the slide from our presentation that you have included here, indeed we have put the words specific objectives between inverted commas, because it is right to say that whilst ISO 1 has to be considered as a full policy objective at the same level as PO 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, as Simona said. There isn't in the regulation, so from a legal point of view, there isn't a specific objective. We haven't provided a list and a closed list of specific objectives, as is the case for the others. Nevertheless, indeed, for pragmatic reasons and for a better programming exercise, we have considered that the activities listed in Article 14 should be read as if they were specific objectives. So legally they are not, but we think that in terms of programming, that's how we should see them. And in SFC, if I'm not mistaken, these the list of 6 that you have here will be listed, and you will be able to choose and pick from the 6. So from a legal point of view, no specific objective, but from a practical point of view, let's agree that the list of activities is the specific objectives. And this is also why we have number 6, which is other activities to support better cooperation governance, because the list in the article is not exhaustive. It's not an exhaustive list. So you could actually find other things to do. And if that's the case, then you should, in SFC, put them under point 6, other activities if they don't fit in the other ones. And you can mix those 6 in your priority axis. You can choose to work on 1 or 2 of those. You could also choose to work on 1 in one priority axis and on another one in another priority axis. This is actually quite flexible. The only thing which is not flexible is that you cannot mix ISO 1 with a policy objective inside the same axis. So I hope this clarifies a little bit our objective. And okay, Bernard, do you want to take the floor back for third question, or should I? Because it's a little bit linked in a way. Huh?
Just go ahead, Natalie, that we save time.
So, because the whole question of indicators, I think it was also very well covered in our PowerPoint slides and in the presentation. If you choose ISO 1, our preference would be for you to identify, first of all, Interreg common indicators. I mean, we have a list of these common indicators in Table 2, Annex 1, and please go there as the first place to find indicators that match what you are trying to do and what you would want to change by using ISO 1. That would be the very first thing to do. But then again, of course, if there is an Interreg, if it's not covered by the Interreg specific objectives and you find something very useful in the ERDF list of common indicators, you can, of course, use those. It's not forbidden. Although I have to say that not many of the ERDF ones will fit cooperation. But if you do find something, then please go ahead. And then the third option is, of course, to go for program-specific indicators that you can also have. We like the idea of the common indicators simply because for the Commission, and I think for you too, to some extent, it is easier for us to then catch this ISO 1 impact much better if we can aggregate the figures across the programs. The moment you choose to have your own indicator, then aggregation becomes impossible, and the information becomes usable only for yourself and monitoring the progress of the program, and it's less useful in terms of communicating the impact of Interreg at large. And this is a little bit the distinction between the common indicators and the program-specific indicators. So if you feel that you cannot capture what you are trying to do with the existing indicators, then of course try to formulate your own, bearing in mind what can be measured in your area. I think I can't really go much further than that at the moment.
There is a question related to indicators, which there is an easy answer, yes.
Yes, this is easy to answer in the sense that that's what I just said. And of course, what I said for ISO 1 applies to the rest is please use the Interreg specific indicators as much as possible. As much as possible. They should be first in the hierarchy of indicators. If they fit what you want to measure, what you want to change, what you want to say about the impact of the program, please use the Interreg specific indicators for all the activities that you want to undertake in your program. That should be really the first thing to do, indeed.
And then there is a next one related to implementation under the Interreg Specific Objective. So it refers to what you've stated in the video, to prepare strategies or later to implement, but I guess it's prepare and later implement, depending on the nature of the project, of course, but I understood it doesn't, of course, include any implementation activities.
Yeah, if I may jump into that. Yes, indeed, the under ISO 1 transnational programs can support all the other actions that are there. But as a specific one, there is the action which should enhance the capacity of the macro-regional, of the implementation of the macro-regional strategies. But otherwise, the full menu applies, yes. With, of course, the disclaimer of the current state of the legal texts, obviously. There is no development in this.
Okay,
we don't have an update on the regulations. That's easy. We don't have an update. There is no trilogues going on ETC right now because of the emergency to deal with the pandemic and everything that has come in since the pandemic outbreak. So at the moment, the ETC regulation is a little bit in the fridge. There was mention of a possible trilogue in June, but I think, if I'm not mistaken, this has now been postponed to the next presidency. So it will all move under the German presidency, possibly in September, I guess. But there is nothing new from what we've said before, no.
I see. Next one is about investment equipment, because in the video it was made quite clear that it's not an investment priority, and equipment, if needed for project implementation, but for sure not to a large extent. Could you elaborate a bit more on that, either Natalie or Simona?
Yeah, indeed. The idea of infrastructure investment is certainly not in line with what we envisage under ISO 1. If you read the 6 types of activities that we have listed in Article 14, I mean, I don't think you can find much scope there for investing in infrastructure. As for equipment, I would say it's the same principle, even if there we can probably see that in some cases a limited equipment element could be justified. I'm thinking, for instance, of the whole discussion we are having on cross-border or transnational data and statistics. You could envisage very well here, for instance, purchasing technical software that makes, for instance, visualization of data much more much easier and of course more usable for end users. So you could envisage there buying some form of equipment. So it's not totally excluded, it's not forbidden, but I would say that it would have to be very strongly justified in order to be eligible. And it would have to really be needed in order to achieve a governance objective, in order to improve something from a governance point of view. I don't think you could, for instance, envisage buying equipment for a hospital. That would not really be something that you could consider there. But you could envisage equipment for measuring flows of passengers, for instance, that kind of stuff, which would then help you having a better picture of your territory and how the interactions actually happen between actors in your territory. That's just an example. I'm coming from the cross-border angle. Maybe my colleagues want to add some other examples from the transnational or the external borders world.
But just the question below, so online platforms, databases, things like that are of course obvious tools which you use nowadays in governance, so no problem from that side, I guess.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
If I may comment on the transnational side or external borders, and Pierre-Emmanuel can also complement on the outermost regions. I don't think that we see it, I mean, we don't see it differently from this perspective. Indeed, I mean, even for transnational programs, there again, we are in the governance issues. So again, we do not see a need to finance infrastructure or hard investments under this ESO or external borders. That's the same principle. If we want to finance infrastructure, there are other policy objectives to do that. Sure. I don't know if Pierre-Emmanuel would like to add something on the outermost regions.
Okay, thank you, Simona. Can I jump into the debate here? Or, okay. No, first of all, I would like to thank Interact for having organized this meeting and a time slot that is suitable for our colleagues of the outermost regions. I see that here colleagues from the Caribbean, it's very early for them, and colleagues from the Indian Ocean programs can attend. And indeed, this Interreg Specific Objective 1 is very, very important for these programs, where a number of cooperation problems arise. For the moment, we don't have a very clear idea of what to put under the specific objective for these programs. But this is sure that this specific objective is not tailored for financing infrastructure. And there, I fully agree with my colleagues with Simona and Natalie. What the question behind the ISO 1 Interreg Specific Objective better governance, the question that this objective has to reply is what makes cooperation work in your area? How, what can I do to improve cooperation in the area? And this is the only question, or the basic question, that the programs have to think about and to raise when at the time they will draft the program and the specific objective. This is not the question, is not what makes my Interreg program work, which is quite different. That this is more technical assistance. And as with regard to the outermost regions, there is a major issue, which is coordination between the ERDF on one side and the European Development Fund on the other side. And we think that here, and in line with the communication of 2017 from the Commission, from the Council and the Parliament on outermost regions, we think that there the platforms that would be designed to set up this cooperation, combination between the two funds has its place in under this specific objective. This is the main message on our side for the moment concerning this one for the outermost regions. Just to mention that I have a colleague in my team who is here, who is Maria Omem. She has joined finally. Okay, thank you very much, and I remain available for any further question.
Thank you, Pierre-Emmanuel. There is a question on top. What about transnational programs not supporting a macro-regional strategy, if that has any influence on the variety of these 6 specific activities or objectives? Simona, would you maybe briefly respond to that, please?
Yes, sure. According to our legal colleagues, legal expert colleagues, and those who are in charge of the drafting of the regulation, I understand that no, the transnational cooperation programs, they can do the full menu of actions envisaged under ISO 1. The way the current compromise stands, it looks like there is not a limitation for the transnational programs to work under ISO 1, but there is a specific action foreseen for them. So obviously those that cover the areas covered by macro-regional strategies, they would be supposed to work on the implementation of macro-regional strategies, as they are anyway asked to focus their policy objectives and their overall orientations on and to be aligned with the macro-regional strategies. But under ISO 1, they also can do all the other actions foreseen.
Thank you, Simona. Then there is now a question related to people-to-people actions, requests for a couple of examples, and using other policy objectives, but that's clear, small project funds can be established in principle under all policy objectives. But I'm not sure to whom to pass the question now.
Well, I take that, if you don't mind, as a start, and then my colleagues can, of course, come in and complement. These are two concepts here. People-to-people actions is one thing, and small project fund is another. Sometimes they coincide, and you implement people-to-people actions through small project funds, but not necessarily. People-to-people actions are, what we mean by that, are really normally projects of a relatively small scale, where the program finances activities that bring citizens of a region, country or region, with citizens of other countries or regions, either neighboring or in the wider context of transnational programs belonging to the same space. And typically you would support children activities, cultural activities, linguistic activities, sporting activities, things where a small budget goes a very long way in making people aware of each other, getting to know each other, and thereby enhancing trust and understanding. So that's really what we mean. The way you can then implement those types of activities can be usefully done through the small project funds, whereby the program authorities earmark a certain amount for those types of activities in a certain area, and also then appoint an organization, an institution to manage that. You have to read, of course, all the requirements that we have put in the regulation, but that's one way of doing it. Use a small project fund to finance these types of activities, typically also in a smaller geographical area where that institution has a mandate to operate. But we also have cases where managing authorities manage directly what they sometimes call micro projects, for instance, where they again give smaller grants to institutions that are not looking for a lot of money, but looking for seed money that will kickstart activities between citizens of all ages, basically. That's really what we mean by that. And ISO 1 can be used for that. If you want to do citizens' activities, for instance, limited to the field of environment, then by all means, use PO2 to do that. There is no problem, no limitation, you can do that. And if you want to set up a small project fund under PO2 because you think that you can raise awareness, for instance, of climate change or environmental issues and all the gestures that we all need to learn to implement in our daily lives, if you think this is really important and you want to finance all sorts of small groups here and there, by all means, have a small project fund or another type of fund under PO2, for instance. Absolutely not exclusively limited to ISO 1, at least not for CBC programs.
Thank you. Would any other colleague like to come in on that, or do we move to the next question?
Bernard, if I may just a short point on the external borders. I mean, all of what Nathalie has said obviously applies to external borders as well. People-to-people actions are very important for us in this respect. I just would like to point out that for external borders, it is really very important to think about inclusion of civil society, because the civil society support is a very important feature for external borders, and also building the administrative capacity. So, but you can have, so on the people-to-people, obviously, if NGOs, local NGOs can be involved in the people-to-people actions, it will be absolutely and most welcome. So, and you can, yes, the typical actions could be, you know, supporting cultural and or sports events which are organized maybe by some local NGOs, you know, supporting, yes, like very small scale events where people are, citizens can meet, and NGOs are as well involved and participate. So this is more or less for the external borders.
Thanks a lot, Simona. There is now an interesting question which is here for quite a time. To use the Interreg specific objectives to improve cooperation among ETC programs. Now, I for the first time encountered such a thing far up in the north, where transnational program Northern Periphery Arctic and cross-border programs in the area started to cooperate. So that seems to be the question, whether this type of cooperation, which is then not necessarily linked to any macro region, could also be supported from under the Interreg specific objective.
Personally, sorry, this is Nathalie again from D2. Personally, I would say absolutely yes. We would like to see more cooperation, more capitalization among programs. At the moment, we seem to have a lot of activities going on involving the authorities of the program using their technical assistance, which is great. But indeed, at the level of beneficiaries and projects, there are many things to do, and provided the cooperation established between certain Interreg programs of different nature and different scales inside a certain area would, in my opinion, would be eligible and recommended, provided, of course, the program can show that it will help. It will increase its capacity, or it will increase its knowledge of the territory. It will also encourage economies of scales by not reinventing the wheel and things like that. I think for me this is all under better governance indeed. So I would say yes, but there here please keep a clear demarcation line between cooperation among programs at the level of the authorities. I would finance with technical assistance, and the same type of cooperation between beneficiaries, project partners, which would, in my opinion, fit very well under ISO 1.
From the D1 side, namely for transnational cooperation programs, this fits very well under the specific objective or actions foreseen under ISO 1 for transnational cooperation programs. The support of the governance of the macro-regional strategies is also a lot about the cooperation among transnational programs, about the different macro-regional strategies. So from this perspective, for transnational cooperation, it is a valid and it would be a very valid point, or a very valid kind of actions to be supported. Definitely on the external borders, it is, as Nathalie said, the same line applies basically. And from our side as well, we would very much like to encourage the cooperation between the ETC programs themselves, now also between those which are on internal borders, internal Interreg, and the external borders, be it with enlargement or the neighborhood countries. I don't know if Pierre-Emmanuel, would you like to add in this respect something on the outermost regions?
Yes, thank you, Simona. Yes, I would like to add something concerning the outermost regions, as here, maybe I will separate a little bit from what my colleagues have just said. There is a recurrent issue with the outermost regions programs is the cooperation between outermost regions on a certain number of thematics. For instance, energy or employment, but only between outermost regions. Outermost regional cooperation programs are designed to improve the integration, the regional integration of these programs in their specific area. According to DG Regio, we do not believe that cooperation of outermost regions between themselves supports implementing the regional integration of the outermost regions in their areas. For this reason, and the regulation is rather clear at this respect, we are not really favorable for integrating cooperation with other outermost regions within the Interreg programs. First, the second reason is that financial resources are limited for Interreg, and the last decisions taken with COVID-19 measures show that Interreg hasn't received an additional funding within the regional policy. And the third argument is that there is now, with Article 17 of the CPR, there is now the possibility to embed cooperation in mainstream programs. And there we believe, and this is our line to take, that mainstream outermost regions programs should include a measure for the cooperation of outermost regions between themselves, but mainstream programs and not Interreg programs. This is why here I would have my reservations of including under ISO 1 cooperation between outermost regions programs. This is much more, as I said previously, to improve the cooperation in the area, in the regions. And for instance, a platform that might combine EDF and ERDF is typically the type of problem of issue that ISO 1 might solve. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pierre-Emmanuel.
Bernard, I would really like to add one last thing, because indeed Pierre-Emmanuel is very right in what he says. And when, at least under CBC, and I think also under Simona's control, under transnational, we would very much support the idea of better coordination between programs at beneficiary level and partner level within a certain area. Because if you start thinking of cooperation between any program without a territorial dimension, then we really need to go back to what will be done under Interreg Europe, for instance. And we cannot duplicate things, and we cannot start creating our own silo. For me, and I maybe did not express that very clearly, there is a strong territorial dimension to this. And I would say that under a certain, for instance, transnational program, making sure that everyone working at another scale learns from each other, work with each other is something that would be very favorably looked upon, whereas the same type of action between any program basically would be a bit more difficult to do with ISO 1, as it will happen in other instruments. Sorry, I just wanted to clarify that.
Thanks, Natalie. Now there is one, again, not directly related to the Interreg Specific Objective, quite technical guidance, indicator fish. At least also in Interact, we are not aware of any new guidance, and we will have a meeting exactly on that point in September 22-23. But we've been recently in touch with the unit in charge of it, and we understood there is so far no news on that side. But please, colleagues, help me if you have some. Correct. Yeah. Okay. So then we move quickly to the next question. Selection of projects without calls, only decision by the MC. So who would like to answer first on that?
I can take that because it might come from one of the external programs, because I think that well, it's not a typical question under ETC, because the Interreg programs can select projects without calls. Indeed, that's foreseen. You can select strategic projects directly, but for ENI CBC programs, indeed, there are quite strict rules when you can select project without calls. There are specific articles which define the direct award, so-called. And this is not, I understand, also linked directly to ISO 1. But yes, it is. It will be possible to select projects without call. it's foreseen as one of the ways how to implement the programs.
So there's an alignment between the, so to say, the internal and the external programs. So now for both, the option to select without call will exist. Next
Yes,
question.
and sorry,
Yeah.
Bernard, just to complement, for the internal cross-border programs, yes, it is very possible. It's always been possible. And we've been engaging on a regular basis with programs on the idea of looking again at how projects are selected, especially when you want to be very strategic, when you have some very specific objectives in mind, where sometimes the number, simply the number of beneficiaries who can help you meet your objective and transform your area is so limited that a call for project is meaningless, might even not lead you to any results. This is something that we have very strongly recommended to programs. It might even deserve, I would say, some specific training and exchanges like we are doing now for PO5 and PO and ISO 1, because this is quite fundamental to the way we want to work if we want to be more strategic. Making everybody apply to big calls without distinction of who they are and what their mandate is sometimes not necessarily the most effective way of doing it. So let's not forget that topic. It's quite important.
Thank you, Nathalie. Now there is an interesting one because it's again about the relation between the Interreg Specific Objective and a little bit about if you have to limit the number of policy objectives in your program. What about taking governance actions which might have gone under a different policy objective into Interreg Specific Objective, better cooperation governance? Example raised here is about transport, where it's quite obvious that many CPC programs simply don't have the money for any infrastructure, and the usual action is limited to rather planning and coordination, but it might go for any other sector or subject. So who would like to answer on that?
Ricardo, you want to come in?
I'm sorry, I was muted. I can start. This fits perfectly well into legal obstacles. And whenever we have a legal obstacle, it has a legal nature, but it depends on, it has a semantic perspective. So this issue of being legal obstacle, better governance versus being semantic would always be present. This type of problems with administrative coordination in traffic planning and cross-border public transport is one of the sources of legal obstacles that we find frequently. So the answer is yes, please, they are most welcome.
Very positive. And there is the other one, what about pilot actions under Interreg Specific Objective 1, solving legal administrative obstacles? I think it's, for me, it's answered, but please, Ricardo.
It's the same question. I was about to answer to both, but suddenly there was another one popping in between. Yes, please. What we have learned is that frequently the difficulty is to identify the obstacles, to identify the root causes of the legal obstacle. People know what they cannot do, but they don't know exactly what is the legal cause, what is the legal nature of the obstacle. This type of pilot actions are very effective into demonstrating the legal nature and therefore to devise possible solutions for those legal obstacles that impede interactions and cooperation in general. So again, yes, please.
Thank you, Ricardo. Then I take the top one, cautiously, of course, because it seems to be a number of questions. What we've done is that we prepared a lean paper on question answers on policy objective 5, which we do hope answers the most relevant questions needed for programming. and is also in line with Commission thinking. And thanks to your support, Natalie, and also thanks to the support of colleagues from D2. And of course, we would like to do the same on the Interreg Specific Objective, better cooperation governance, but it may take a bit of time. So let's say, and it might of course not cover all the questions, but we might take the liberty to cluster questions and make things a bit more easy to handle for us. Then there's an interesting proposal, I would even say, from Steph. He raised the point.
Yes.
Yeah, who would like to take that one?
Well, let me take it from the TBC point of view. I guess it's Steph, well, one of the Stephs I know. Yes, of course, you're right, Steph. The 6 actions are semi-specific objectives, strictly speaking. It might not be practical for everyone. It might be very practical for others. So I don't think there is a rule on that. If you wanted to do a mixture of different types of actions under ISO 1, yes, please go use other number 6. That's why we've put it there. But we might very well have programs that will not be interested in legal and administrative cooperation, but will be very interested in people-to-people actions, for instance, and that would want to limit their use of ISO 1 to people, in which case they would choose the relevant semi-specific objective. If that's not the case for you, if you think you will do more than 1 or 2 there, then please, yes, use number 6.
Yes, from the transnational perspective and external borders, indeed, we understand that the actions listed under ISO 1 are not of the definite nature. So indeed, that's why there is this other actions, and we do encourage the programs to use them, but at the same time make also the use of those which are proposed and which match with what you want to do. If Pierre-Emmanuel, you would like to add anything?
As for the autonomous regions are concerned, I have the impression that number 6 is the place, the better where these actions might take place, because macro-regional strategies, legal and administrative cooperation, maybe people-to-people actions, not really. So this is good to have this generic so-called specific objective.
Thanks. Now there comes a question quite straightforward to staff exchanges between program partners, and I understood that as long as it clearly serves capacity building, this is of course an eligible activity, but please, who would like to answer on that? Staff exchange between program partners financed under Interreg Specific Objective 1.
Well, I think that it depends on what is the ultimate aim of such actions, right? If it's to improve the capacities for managing the programs, then I would rather consider it under technical assistance. But if again you have in mind the capacities of the beneficiaries, then this is a different story. I don't know what you think, Natalie.
Well, yes, for me, clearly, if it's between the program authorities, it's got to be done under technical assistance. If it's between, if you see benefit in bringing partners, because program partners is a bit of a weird expression here. If it's project partners, for instance, some that are active in the same area geographically, or some that are active in the same theme, like environment or transport, if you think there is benefit in encouraging exchanges between project partners so that you capitalize and you learn from each other. For sure, that would fit under ISO 1, as is clearly institutional capacity building for the public authority. So yes, if it's about the secretariat and the managing authority, then it has to be under TA.
For example, if it's about cooperation between ministries of the environment, which are represented in the MC, and they would like to go for a targeted staff exchange, which
well, if it's MC, if it's only MC based, it has to be TA, not
okay.
ISO.
I think here, if I still may, again, if it's linked with the support to the macro-regional strategy, I think that there it can be debated, because the
yes, you're right,
which are linked to the implementation of macro-regional strategies. The transnational programs are one of the vehicles to make the strategies work. So not the ultimate one, of course, but one. So there, indeed, if there is a clear link on the improvement of the governance of macro-regional strategy, there I would see that as eligible under transnational programs.
You. Then there is a nice one, the recommendations to find legal obstacles.
That one's for me.
Yes.
That's a quite interesting issue, and we must start by looking at it as it must be bottom up, because the differences from amongst the territories are quite unique, and the obstacles have different facets in the different territories. However, we should also take into account what has already been done in Europe and the different solutions that have been found, the different problems that have been found, namely taking into account what was done in the cross-border review, on the B solutions, but also on different studies that have pointed to types of cooperation that exist, on the missing rail links, the cooperation on healthcare, and the studies that we are going to launch very soon on public transport. How to find these obstacles? One of the lessons that we have seen is that in most cases, people know what they cannot do and wish to do. They do not know what are the root causes of the legal obstacle. They do not know what are the specific legal dispositions that impede, that hamper cooperation. So one of the issues is precisely to do this. This can be done with studies. That was the basis of our cross-border review that has identified several of them. But at a certain moment, there should be the involvement of experts to find the root causes of the legal obstacles. Having pools of experts, workshops with experts, dedicating some work time of experts to address the legal the problems that are felt by stakeholders is essential in this side. But it should be done together. Otherwise, it doesn't work. It cannot be done only from one side of the border. It must be done in cooperation with both sides. And take a look to everything that we are publishing. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And remember always the paradoxon of cooperation. The more you cooperate, the more obstacles you will find.
Bernard?
Yes.
Bernard? Could I complement what Ricardo said with an answer to the question number 3 now on the screen? It used to be number 1. It's gone down to number 3, but it's a little bit the same answer I wanted to give. Yes, the small project fund linked to ISO 1. Ricardo is absolutely right. In the context of internal cross-border cooperation, the obstacles need to be identified bottom-up, because it's those who actually interact across the border that realize quickly that they have breaks and obstacles that they have to overcome. So that's one thing. And for me, I was very interested by the idea, I think that was formulated by the EMR program, including in the video that you taped of certain programs sharing their views on ISO 1, the idea of a small project fund, for instance, that would be dedicated to the identification bottom-up of cross-border obstacles, and then providing them with funding to look at, as Ricardo said, the root causes and then the possible solutions, would be very, very interesting. And that's what I think I said during the presentation, that using a small project fund tool to then make these cross-border obstacles appear to the surface and then give people small amounts of money, because the resolution of these obstacles is not always very costly. And we have seen with B solutions that even small amounts of 10,000, 20,000 euro can go a long way towards even identifying solutions. So that's a very interesting combination, and I think that's what I meant in the presentation. I would also add to Ricardo's response, please use the intergovernmental bodies that exist along certain borders. They are existing mechanism to identify, I've lost everything here, okay. There are certain mechanisms to identify obstacles, people who talk to each other about that. I would say also institutions such as EGTCs and Euroregions are very well placed to also know what these obstacles are, and trusting them to identify the obstacles very clearly and the root causes, and then solving them is also a very good way for, in answer to Jean-Louis' question.
Thank you, Natalie. Now there is another one upcoming. It's about setting up expert pool to help generate the project pipeline to prepare projects. If such a project could also be part of the Interreg Specific Objective, or if that would be rather action on the technical assistance. Who would like to answer?
Well, to me, if I may, to me, it looks rather like a typical assistance kind of activity, where you need to ensure that your potential beneficiaries are up to task, which is linked to the governance or the implementation of the program as such, and not really the territory of the program.
I would support Simona on that, and say that to Nikki, that in order for it to be done under ISO 1, you'd have to really have a very clear link to building long-term governance, rather than specific capacity actually to prepare a project, which is very often understanding the rules of the program and fitting in the rule of the program, rather than the real governance issue. So I would really agree with Simona here that for me, project preparation is much more geared towards making sure projects can access the funding, which is not what we mean by governance of the program area.
Okay, then maybe to Simona. How relevant is better cooperation governance for external border programs, and also maybe the relationships to Safer Europe?
Thank you, Bernhard. Very short answer, very relevant, indeed, very relevant, because the draft regulation gives specific tasks for programs on EU external borders, what they should do under ISO 1, apart from, of course, all the other actions which are there for them. But specifically, they should address the sustainable democracy development. They should address support to civil society. So their role in the reforming processes and democratic transitions. So we are here indeed, you see the link to the EU external policies as such. All these issues are fundamentals for support in the partner countries. So for our programs, since they operate in this bilateral context, they are on the edge of cohesion policy and EU external policy. These things under ISO 1 are really specifically aimed to contribute to the, let's say, external policy part of the programs. So it is very, very relevant, and indeed also in cooperation with TESIM, we are very much let's say supporting and developing what should be done under this perspective. There was also, I just want to remind that we have hinted at some actions as well in our joint paper on the future programming, which was published in January. Well, we will hopefully develop further on that in the revised version of the joint paper, which we would like to prepare over the summer and to publish sometime in autumn. Yeah, on the link to ISO 2, well, here ISO 2 is about safer and more secure Europe. So the governance is not at all aimed under ISO 2. It's really for, let's say, for the programs, for the ENI CBC programs, it's a bit of a continuation of the work done under border crossing management and under migration management. There were two thematic objectives, or there are two thematic objective links to that. So ISO 2 is a bit a continuation of this aspect, but I don't see too many links between the two actually.
Okay, because now the two top ranking questions, in my view, have been answered already.
Yeah.
That was the first one on the cooperation among programs, to look out for the clear demarcation line towards technical assistance. And from perspective of outermost regions, a clear yes to support cooperation platforms between EDF and ERDF. So we are coming now. Okay. Then if you use it to develop. I'm just now trying to quickly see which questions have been answered already. There is one, the use of Interreg Specific Objective to develop strategies, and it's quite clear that it's difficult, let's say, from an abstract point of view, it's quite difficult to imagine if you are working on strategy building in the Interreg Specific Objective 1, how to determine the funding under Policy Objective 5. But I think there cannot be any general answer to that, but maybe would any of the colleagues like to say a few words on that, about budgeting? And
well, indeed, there is no easy answer to that, because the territorial strategy that you are supporting with ISO 1 could lead to strategies that highlight very significant needs. I would say, I would take starting point the amount of money your task force or programming task force agrees to put into PO5, really, because also PO5 then the territorial strategy should be something that attracts other types of financing, and we explained that quite extensively under PO5 training, that it should look beyond Interreg and not just look at what Interreg could possibly finance. It has to really highlight the needs of the territory covered by the strategy. And therefore, at the end of the day, I guess your politicians will say, well, we are prepared to spend so much on integrated territorial development, put it in the budget, and then see how much goes to which strategy if you have several. It's unsatisfactory as an answer, I'm very aware, but I think this is the only thing you can possibly do in practice. And then you could always modify your program later on if suddenly you had some very robust justification for saying in the end we want to spend less or more on PO5, and this is always possible.
And maybe finally a quick answer to the question. Sorry.
Yes, under which specific objective could a program work on strategies? Well, the wording of the regulation as it stands now says that the specific objective we have called enhance institutional capacity of public authorities and stakeholders to implement macro-regional strategies and sea basin strategies, as well as other territorial strategies. So it's clearly actually written in the new version of the regulation. So it's under the macro-regional specific objective, which has now been enlarged to cover other types of strategy.
Yes, just to complement Article 14.4b, I understand.
Yes.
Maybe the last one to you, Natalie. How to ensure having a high impact under the objective with a small budget and no infrastructure?
It's somebody who has never met me before, because I've been arguing for decades now that it's not about money, it's about what we change, the kind of decisions we take in terms of managing certain territories together. And indeed, this is the heart of this governance ISO 1 objective. Building a bridge can be a very useful and necessary investment, but in many, at least I'm talking again for internal border regions, you can really change a lot with no infrastructure. I'm thinking of education, of health, of culture, and any action linked to increasing trust and understanding doesn't require any type of infrastructure, and is much more about putting people together in a sustainable manner, and making sure that they have enough to organize a dialogue and to then influence the decision makers. For me, this is where you change things, as much with that as you do with certain types of infrastructure.
Thanks, Natalie. And I think, yeah, it's half
if
past
I may,
2.
Yeah, if I may complement to that from the transnational perspective, well, it's very clear that for macro-regional strategies to be successful, governance aspect is key. This is the essential thing. If the governance of the macro-regional strategy does not work properly, if all the stakeholders are not on board, if the key implementers are not empowered to do what they need to do, then it won't work. So from this perspective, it is really an essential type of action. Exactly, I think the budget, even though it's a small budget, it should allow for this big machine as macro-regional strategy is to work. So all the coordination, all these soft actions, they are facilitating the implementation. So from this perspective, there's no doubt. And on the external borders, I think it's exactly what Natalie said.
So I think big thanks to Natalie, Simona, big thanks to Ricardo, Pierre-Emmanuel, and question to Mercedes. Did we forget anything? But I think it's time.
I think we cover everything.
Meaning that we would like to thank everyone participating in our meeting.